On a Christmas Eve like any other, a poor little girl tries to make her sister's wish come true with coins she had saved in secret. When she's humiliated in a store, her world falls apart under the gaze of indifferent onlookers. But an unexpected act of kindness rekindles her hope and changes everything forever. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from in the comments below. Now back to the story. The city of Chicago was waking up that December to clear skies and the typical hustle and bustle of the days leading up to Christmas. The downtown streets were swarming with hurried people, colorful shopping bags swinging from their arms, Christmas music spilling from the doors of stores, and window displays sparkling with promises of happiness wrapped in gift paper. It was a chaotic and beautiful dance where every person carried their own dreams and urgencies, crossing busy sidewalks with the certainty that Christmas would somehow make up for all the year's shortcomings. In the middle of that crowd, an 11-year-old girl walked with short, steady steps. Her name was Emily, and she wore a faded t-shirt, patched-up shorts, and a pair of flip-flops that had long forgotten their original color. Her brown hair was pulled back into a crooked, hastily made ponytail, and her small face held a strange mix of determination and fear. Emily wasn't there to stroll around or look at the lights. She had a mission. And that mission made her ignore the curious and disapproving glances some people cast her way. In her hands, she clutched a worn-out cloth pouch where she kept coins she had saved over 2 weeks. There were pennies, dimes, and quarters. Each one represented an unseen effort, a silent sacrifice. Emily had helped a neighbor hang laundry on the line, carried groceries for an elderly woman on the 3rd floor, and swept the sidewalk for a small corner store near her home. All of this in exchange for spare change that on its own was worth almost nothing, but together formed the hope of a miracle. The miracle in this case was a doll. Not just any doll, but the one her little sister Lily, who was only 5, had seen in a store window weeks ago and mentioned with sparkling eyes. Lily hadn't asked for anything out loud, because she had learned, far too early, that asking was just another word for disappointment. But Emily had seen the way the little girl looked at the doll, how she stood in front of the window for a few extra seconds, how she let out a soft sigh before walking on. And that had pierced Emily's heart like a sharp blade. Emily and Lily lived together in a small, stuffy house on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where the streets were crooked, the asphalt had more potholes than surface, and the houses were squeezed together as if apologizing for their existence. They no longer had their parents, or rather they did, but in a way that was worse than not having them. Their mother, Claire, had left when Lily was still a baby. Emily held on to a few memories of her, the smell of her hair, a song, hummed softly, the way she gave tight hugs before bed. Then suddenly Claire disappeared. No one explained anything properly to Emily, who was only 6 at the time. They said her mother had gone away, that she wasn't coming back, that it was for the best. Since then, the girls had been under the care of Brenda, a distant relative whose exact relationship no one could quite explain. Brenda wasn't evil, but she wasn't good either. She was a tired, embittered woman who had taken the girls in more out of a sense of moral pressure than any real desire. She worked as a nail technician at a salon, came home late, spoke little, and yelled a lot. She didn't hit them, but her words hit like fists. And the worst part was the silence, that icy silence that followed the yelling, when Brenda would lock herself in her room and leave the girls alone in the living room, feeling like they were a burden, a mistake, a problem without a solution. Emily had become a mother without being one. She woke up early, made watery hot chocolate for Lily, carefully combed her sister's hair, made up bedtime stories, and always gave the bigger portion of food to the little one. Lily, in turn, clung to Emily as if she were the only piece of the world that made sense. And that was why Emily was there, in that bustling mall in downtown Chicago, with coins in her pocket and her heart pounding. She walked into the toy store. The place was huge, full of colorful aisles, towering shelves packed with boxes, flashing lights, and cheerful music playing non-stop. It smelled of new plastic, that artificial scent of something never touched by human hands. Emily felt the air conditioning chill her skin and realized, embarrassed, that she was sweating. She wiped her hands on her shorts, took a deep breath and started walking slowly through the aisles. There were children everywhere, accompanied by smiling parents pushing full shopping carts. There were grandparents calmly choosing gifts, young couples debating which toy was more educational, and salespeople offering help with wide smiles and friendly voices. Emily felt both invisible and watched, as if everyone could tell just by looking at her that she didn't belong there. But she kept going. She passed the aisles of expensive bikes, science kits, and giant dolls. That cost as much as a month's rent on their house. Finally, she reached the bottom shelf where the simpler toys were. And there it was. The small doll, made of simple plastic, with synthetic brown hair and a faded pink dress. There was nothing special about it to an outsider, but to Emily it was perfect. She picked up the doll carefully, as if holding something sacred, and walked to the checkout counter. There were 2 lines. One was for credit cards, fast and modern. The other was for cash, slower, with a flawlessly put-together cashier. Emily got in. The cash line waited her turn, and when she reached the front, she gently placed the doll on the counter. The cashier's name was Jessica. She was about 30, with straight bleached blonde hair in a perfect bun, impeccable makeup, manicured nails, and a starched uniform. She glanced at the doll, then at Emily, and frowned with a mix of impatience and disdain. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask if she could help. She just scanned the doll's barcode and announced the price in a cold voice. Emily's stomach churned. The price was a little higher than she had calculated. She took out the cloth pouch, opened it with trembling hands, and started pouring the coins onto the counter. One by one, making neat little stacks, counting softly, trying not to make a mistake. The coins clinked as they fell, a sound that seemed to echo through the entire store. Jessica let out a loud, irritated sigh. She looked at the coins as if they were trash and crossed her arms impatiently. Behind Emily, other people started to line up. Someone cleared their throat. Another person muttered something Emily couldn't quite hear. She sped up her counting, but her hands were shaking so much that a few coins slipped and fell to the floor. Emily quickly bent down to pick them up, her face burning with shame. When she stood up, Jessica was looking at her with an expression that mixed disgust with cruel amusement. The cashier scooped up some of the coins, counted them rudely, and pushed the rest back across the counter. She was short $2.50. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, but she swallowed hard. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't. She looked at Jessica and said, her voice trembling, that she would go get the rest of the money, that she'd be right back, and asked if she could please hold the doll for her. Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh. "This isn't a layaway counter, kid. Besides, how are you going to get the money? Panhandling on the street? This isn't a place for handouts. You're holding up the other customers. Take your change and get out before I call security." The whole world seemed to collapse on Emily in that moment. She looked around and saw several people watching the scene, some with pity, others with embarrassment, others with indifference. Emily felt her throat tighten, her chest ache, her legs weaken. She started gathering her coins in a desperate hurry, but her hands were shaking so badly that several fell to the floor again. That's when a deep, firm voice, heavy with authority, cut through the air. "What's going on here?" Emily looked up and saw a man approaching. He was about 40, with greying hair styled elegantly, dark brown eyes, and a posture that radiated power without being flashy. He wore a light blue dress shirt, tailored slacks, and expensive-looking shoes. But it wasn't his clothes that stood out. It was the way he looked at the scene, with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. Jessica's posture changed instantly. Her smile returned, but this time it was forced, artificial. "Good morning, sir. I was just explaining to the girl that, unfortunately, she doesn't have enough for the purchase. It's store policy." The man didn't take his eyes off Emily. He approached slowly, bent down slightly to be at her level, and asked in a soft voice that contrasted with the hard look he had given the cashier, "How much is she short?" Emily was so scared she could barely answer. "$2.50, she whispered. The man took out his wallet, pulled out a $50 bill and placed it on the counter. "She's taking the doll, and I want you to apologize to her. Now." Jessica blinked, confused. "Sir, I don't understand." I was just doing my job." Is your job to humiliate children? To treat a little girl like she's a problem because she doesn't have enough money? You think that's professional? The entire store fell silent. Jessica tried to explain herself, but the man held up a hand, silencing her. "I want to speak to the manager, now." An employee rushed to get the manager, who appeared quickly, all solicitous and nervous. The man wasted no time. He explained the situation calmly, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. The manager, realizing the gravity of the moment, apologized 1,000 times, offered discounts and promised to take action. The man didn't accept empty apologies. He simply took the doll, put it in a gift bag, and handed it to Emily. She reflexively refused, a deep-seated fear of owing anyone anything rising within her. But the man insisted, this time with a small, sad smile. "This isn't a favor, it's justice. You worked for this. Take it to your sister and tell her Christmas came early." Emily left the store with the doll clutched to her chest, tears finally streaming freely down her face. She didn't know the man's name. She didn't know who he was. But she knew something had changed that day. And without realizing it, she had just opened the door to a story that would transform her life and the lives of many others forever. The man who had defended Emily in the store was named Richard Miller. And he wasn't just any customer. Richard was the owner of a chain of department stores spreading across Illinois and other Midwestern states. His name was synonymous with success, discipline, and, for many who worked for him, emotional distance. He had built an empire from very little, and that journey had made him tough, controlled, and meticulous in every decision. To Richard, feelings were a luxury that interfered with business. He prided himself on never mixing the personal with the professional. But that December afternoon, something inside him had cracked. When he saw Emily kneeling on the floor of that store, gathering coins while being publicly humiliated, Richard felt an old, forgotten pain return with full force. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. It was anger. It was guilt. It was all tangled in a tight knot in his throat that he couldn't undo. He went home that night, unable to think about anything else. He lived alone in a large, modern apartment in the Gold Coast, with a view of the city, minimalist decor, and absolute silence. Everything there was organized, clean, cold. There were no photographs on the walls, no mementos scattered about. It was as if Richard had erased his own past to move forward, without regrets. But that night, the past knocked on his door with a vengeance. Richard sat on the leather sofa, turned on a single dim lamp, and stared into space. In his mind, the image of Emily apologizing for something that wasn't her fault played on a loop. And with that image came another, the memory of a woman he had loved a long time ago, when he was still young, when he still believed that love could be more important than money. Her name was Claire. They had met when Richard was just starting out working as a manager at a small store. Claire was part of the cleaning crew, a simple young woman with a sweet smile and deep eyes. They fell in love in an unlikely way that defied all social logic. Richard didn't care about that at the time. He thought love was enough. And for almost a year they were happy in a way he was never able to replicate. But Richard's family didn't approve. They thought Claire was a gold digger, unsuitable, a threat to the brilliant future they had planned for him. They pressured him, created humiliating situations, spread lies. Richard, back then, didn't have the strength he would later acquire. He was young, insecure, financially dependent on his parents, and when Claire suddenly disappeared, without a letter, without an explanation, Richard believed the story they told him, that she had left for another man, that she had never truly loved him, that it was for the best. He moved on. He married a woman his family approved of, divorced 3 years later without children, dove headfirst into business, and built an empire. But there was always a part of him that wouldn't heal, an open wound he pretended not to feel, and, they're now seeing Emily, that wound had started to bleed again. Richard picked up the phone and called Marcia, his trusted personal assistant. Marcia was 45, efficient, loyal, and one of the few people Richard truly trusted. She answered on the second ring, knowing that if he called after hours, something serious was happening. "Marcia, I need you to do something for me, discreetly. That girl from the store today, I want you to find out where she lives, who she lives with, what her situation is. Don't scare anyone. Don't make it look like an investigation, just information." Marcia, who had known Richard for years, noticed something different in his voice. It wasn't the tone of a boss giving orders. It was the tone of someone trying to understand something important. She promised she would handle it with care and hung up. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Emily arrived home with the doll hidden under her shirt. The house was a simple two-room structure with peeling walls, a leaky roof, and a rough concrete floor. The iron gate was rusted and creaked when opened. Emily entered slowly, trying not to make a sound because she knew Brenda was home and she didn't want to have to explain anything. Lily was sitting on the living room floor, playing with bottle caps she arranged like pieces of an imaginary game. When she saw Emily, the little girl jumped up and ran to hug her sister, as she did every day. Emily knelt, hugged her tight and whispered in Lily's ear that she had a surprise, but she could only show her later when they were alone. Brenda appeared at the bedroom door with a tired, suspicious expression. "Where were you?" she asked in a harsh voice. Emily replied that she had just gone for a walk, that she hadn't done anything wrong. Brenda huffed, said she didn't want the girls wandering around downtown, that it could be dangerous, that she had enough to worry about. But she didn't press the issue. She never did. It seemed that deep down, she didn't really want to know. Later, when Brenda left for her night shift, Emily finally showed the doll to Lily. The little girl's reaction was everything Emily had hoped for. Her eyes lit up, her mouth opened in a wide smile, and she took the doll so carefully it seemed she was afraid of breaking it. "Is she mine?" Lily asked in disbelief. Emily nodded, feeling her heart swell with joy and something else, the certainty that she had done the right thing. Lily hugged the doll and then hugged Emily with so much force she nearly knocked them both over. "You're the best sister in the whole world," she whispered, and Emily, for the first time in a long time, felt that maybe life wasn't just a burden and a struggle. Maybe there were moments like this, small, simple, but that made it all worthwhile. In the following days, Richard fell into a routine he didn't recognize. During the day, he continued to manage his business with his usual efficiency, but in the breaks, his mind kept returning to Emily. Marcia had discreetly gathered information. Emily lived with her younger sister and a distant relative named Brenda. Their financial situation was precarious. The girl did odd jobs for change. There was no father listed on the birth certificate, and the mother had been reported missing for years. Missing. That word echoed in Richard's head. He asked for more details. Marcia came back with a piece of information that made the ground disappear from under his feet. The mother's name was Claire Santos. Richard felt the world spin. It couldn't be. It couldn't be the same Claire. But how many missing Claires could there be? He asked Marcia to get more information, old photographs, anything. And when he finally saw a faded photo of Claire taken years ago, he was certain. It was her. The woman he had loved. The woman who had disappeared without explanation. And if these girls were her daughters, then where was Claire now? What had happened? Why had she left? Richard felt a mix of emotions so intense he had to lock himself in his office to breathe. There was anger, yes, that she had vanished, but there was also fear. Fear of discovering that the story he'd been told was a lie. Fear of discovering he had abandoned someone who needed him. Fear of discovering that these girls might have a connection to him. Meanwhile, at the store where Emily had been humiliated, a surprise audit was launched. Richard had given direct orders. He wanted to know how many complaints existed against that employee. He wanted to see security footage. He wanted to understand how this had been allowed for so long. What he discovered was worse than he imagined. Jessica, the cashier, had an extensive history of inappropriate behavior. There were reports from customers who had been mistreated, from employees who had been humiliated, of situations that had been covered up by management to protect the store's image. But the problem wasn't just Jessica. It was a culture that allowed it, a culture that valued profit over dignity, that treated customers like numbers and employees like disposable parts. Richard called an emergency meeting with all the chain's managers. And there, for the first time in years, he spoke not as a businessman but as a human being. He told Emily's story without revealing personal details. He explained that a company that humiliates children doesn't deserve to exist, that profit without ethics is theft, that no sales target justifies stripping someone of their dignity. Some managers were surprised, others uncomfortable, but they all understood that something had changed in Richard. And when he announced new customer service policies, mandatory training on empathy and respect, and Jessica's immediate termination, no one questioned him. Jessica, upon being fired, didn't go quietly. She knew this. Could turn into a scandal, could destroy her reputation, could end her chances of working in retail. So she went on the offensive. She found a co-worker, convinced her to testify on her behalf, and started spreading a distorted version of the story. That Emily had tried to steal the doll, that she had only followed protocol, that she was being persecuted for doing the right thing. The lie began to gain traction. Some people believed it, others were doubtful. And when the story started circulating on social media, twisted and sensationalized, Richard realized he had to act fast to protect Emily from an exposure she didn't deserve. He decided then to do something he had never done, get personally involved. He asked Marcia to arrange a discreet visit to Emily's house, not as a businessman, but as someone who genuinely wanted to help. Marcia tried to argue that it could be risky, that he was exposing himself too much, but Richard was firm. "I have to do this, Marcia. This isn't about business. It's about something I should have done a long time ago." If you were in Richard's shoes, would you have made the same decision to get directly involved in Emily's life, knowing the risks? Or would you have maintained a safe professional distance? Let us know in the comments. And so, on a hot December afternoon, Richard parked his car a few blocks from Emily's house and walked the rest of the way. He had taken off his expensive watch, put on simple clothes, and walked with a racing heart he hadn't felt in years. When he got near the house, he saw Emily in the yard, hanging wet clothes on a makeshift line. She was wearing the same patched-up shorts, was barefoot, and was humming a song he didn't recognize. Richard stood for a moment, just watching, and then he noticed something that made his heart clench. Emily had a birthmark on her left arm, clearly visible in the shape of a crescent moon, a birthmark identical to the one Claire had, a birthmark identical to one he himself had, hidden behind his right ear. And in that instant, Richard understood that this story wasn't about charity, it wasn't about social justice. It was about something much bigger, much deeper, and much more frightening. It was about the possibility that these girls weren't just Claire's daughters. It was about the possibility that he, Richard Miller, had a family he never knew existed, and that this family had been kept from him for reasons he had yet to discover. Richard stood paralyzed for a few seconds, watching Emily from a distance. The birthmark on the girl's arm was unmistakable, and the resemblance to Claire became more evident with every second he watched her. The shape of her face, the way she furrowed her brow in concentration, even the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. They were small details, but together they formed a picture that was impossible to ignore. He took a deep breath, trying to organize the thoughts that were crashing inside his head like violent waves. He couldn't just show up and declare his suspicions. He had no concrete proof, only coincidences that could be just that. Coincidences. But something inside him, an old, insistent voice, told him it wasn't a coincidence. It told him he was facing a truth that had been hidden from him for years. Richard decided to approach slowly. He took a few steps toward the rusted gate and cleared his throat softly to get her attention. Emily turned around, startled, dropping the clothes she was hanging, and took a step back when she recognized the man from the store. Her eyes widened with a mix of surprise and fear, and she glanced around as if looking for an escape route. Richard held up his hands in a peaceful gesture, trying to show he wasn't a threat. "Hi, Emily. Sorry to show up like this, unannounced. I just wanted to see if you were okay, and if your little sister liked her present." Emily remained tense, but something in his voice made her relax a little. "She's fine. Lily loves the doll. She sleeps with it every night." There was a pause. "Thank you again for what you did at the store." Richard gave a sad smile. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what any decent person should have done." He hesitated. "Can I talk to you just for a few minutes? I won't take up your time." Emily bit her lip, clearly torn. She looked toward the house, then back at Richard, and finally nodded. They sat on a concrete step near the gate, keeping a respectful distance. Richard wasn't sure how to begin, so he decided to be direct but careful. Emily, I know this might sound strange, but I'd like to know a little more about you and your sister, about how you ended up here with your aunt. Emily was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much she could trust this man. Brenda's not really our aunt. She's like a distant cousin of our mum's, I think. She agreed to take care of us when my mum left. Left? Richard repeated, his heart tightening. Emily, do you know where your mother went? Why she left? The girl shook her head. I was really little when she left. I was 6. I remember some things, like her smell, her voice when she sang, but I don't really remember what happened. One day she was there, the next she was gone. Brenda says she abandoned us because she didn't want to be a mom anymore, that she went to find a better life somewhere else. And do you believe that? Emily looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her fingers nervously. I don't know what to believe. Sometimes I think so, that she really did abandon us, but other times I remember the way she looked at me and Lily, and it doesn't make sense. She didn't seem like someone who would just leave like that. Richard felt a wave of emotion rise in his throat. And your father? Do you know anything about him? Emily shrugged. Never met him. My mom never talked about him. His name isn't on my birth certificate. It's just her name. Richard had to restrain himself from asking more questions that might scare her. But a part of him wanted to scream, to shake the world and demand answers. If Claire had disappeared while pregnant or shortly after Emily was born, there was a very real possibility that he was the father. And if that was true, it meant someone had hidden it from him. Someone had made Claire disappear. Someone had separated him from his daughters. Emily, can I ask you a weird question? Richard said, trying to keep his voice calm. Have you ever heard the last name Miller? Did your mum ever mention that name? Emily frowned, thinking. Not that I remember. Why? Richard shook his head. Never mind. Just curious. He quickly changed the subject. And Brenda, does she treat you well? Emily took a while to answer. She's not mean, she's just tired. And sometimes she gets mad at us, says we're a burden, that she never asked to take care of anyone. But she doesn't hit us or anything. She works a lot and is barely home. Richard felt anger building inside him. These girls deserved more than to be treated like a burden. They deserved love, security, a real childhood. Emily, if you ever need anything at all, I want you to know you can call me. I'm going to leave my number with you, okay? Emily looked at him suspiciously. Why do you want to help us? We're not related to you. You don't even know us. Richard swallowed hard. Because I know what it's like to grow up feeling like you have no one on your side, and because no child should have to go through what you went through in that store. He paused. And because maybe, in a way I don't quite understand yet, our stories are more connected than you think. Emily didn't understand what he meant, but something in his eyes made her accept the business card he held out. She put it in her pocket and thanked him again. Richard said goodbye and walked back to his car, his mind exploding with possibilities and questions. That same evening, Brenda came home from work earlier than usual. She was agitated, nervous, and went straight to her room without speaking to the girls. Emily, who was helping Lily brush her teeth, was on high alert. Brenda rarely came home early, and when she did, it was because something had happened. Minutes later, Brenda came out of her room holding her phone, speaking in a low but tense voice. Emily pressed her ear to the door, trying to listen, and managed to catch snippets of the conversation. Brenda was talking to someone about money, about keeping a secret, about someone asking too many questions. I told you this would be a problem. I warned you. Now there's some rich guy asking questions, wanting to know about the girls. If he finds out the truth, we're screwed. There was a pause. No, I'm not giving anything back. This money is mine. You promised me no one would come looking. Another longer pause. Fine, I'll keep them quiet, but if this blows up, it's not going to be my fault. Emily's blood ran cold. What truth? What money? Who was paying Brenda? And why did she have to keep the girls quiet? Emily moved away from the door before she could be discovered and went back to the room where Lily was already asleep, cuddling her doll. She lay down next to her sister but couldn't close her eyes. Brenda's words echoed in her head like a warning bell. The next day, Richard decided he needed professional help to uncover the truth. He hired a discreet private investigator, someone Marcia knew and trusted. The man's name was George. He was in his 50s, a former cop, and had a reputation for being efficient and confidential. Richard explained the situation without getting into emotional details. He wanted to know everything about Claire Santos, her disappearance, who was paying Brenda to care for the girls, and any connection that might exist between Claire and the Miller family. George took the case and got to work. In less than a week, he returned with information that left Richard in shock. Claire hadn't disappeared willingly. She had been forced out of Chicago by pressure from Richard's family. More, specifically by his father, Sebastian Miller, who was alive at the time and ran the family business with an iron fist. Sebastian had discovered that Claire was pregnant with Richard's child and decided it was a threat to the family's reputation and plans. He approached Claire, offered her a sum of money to leave and never contact Richard again. When Claire refused, Sebastian ramped up the pressure. He threatened to destroy her life, spread lies, and ensure she would never have a chance to raise her child with dignity. Finally, he used cruel emotional blackmail. He said that if she truly loved Richard, she would let him go on with his life without the burden of a family that society would never accept. Claire, young, scared, and without resources, eventually gave in. She took the money, signed documents waiving any claim to Richard's paternity, and left. But the money didn't last long. She had Emily, tried to start over in another city, but things got progressively harder. When she became pregnant again, this time by another man who also abandoned her, Claire was in a state of deep desperation. George discovered that Claire had returned to Chicago when Emily was 6, seeking help. She wanted to tell Richard the truth, wanted him to meet his daughter, but Sebastian, who was still alive then, found out and acted quickly. He paid Brenda, a distant cousin of Claire's, to take the girls and made Claire disappear again. Only this time Claire didn't leave by choice. She was involuntarily committed to a mental health facility, falsely diagnosed with severe psychiatric problems, and has been kept there ever since. Richard read George's report 3 times, feeling a mixture of horror and rage he had never felt in his life. His father had done this. His own father had destroyed Claire's life, had stolen his chance to be a father, had condemned his daughters to a life of neglect and suffering, and Brenda was still being paid by someone in the Miller family, probably Richard's older brothers, to keep the girls hidden and silent. Richard had to leave his office, walk outside, get some fresh air, because he felt like he was going to explode. When he returned, he called George and gave a clear order. "I want Claire's exact location now. I don't care where she is. I'm going to get her, and I want every document that proves the blackmail, the payments, everything. I'm going to end this." George promised to have everything in 48 hours, and Richard, for the first time in years, felt he wasn't just managing a business crisis. He was fighting for something infinitely more important. He was fighting for the chance to right a wrong he never even knew he had committed. He was fighting to bring back the woman he had loved. And he was fighting to be the father that Emily and Lily had always deserved, but never had. Meanwhile, Emily started noticing strange changes at home. Brenda was more nervous, more watchful, and started asking questions about where Emily went, who she talked to, if anyone had been by. Emily, now suspicious of everything, lied and said nothing had happened, but inside she felt a storm was brewing, and that when it finally hit, nothing would ever be the same. The 48 hours George had asked for felt like an eternity to Richard. He could barely sleep, could hardly concentrate in business meetings, and Marcia had to cover for him several times when important clients noticed he was distracted. But Richard didn't care. For the first time in his life, business had taken a back seat. Something much bigger was at stake now. When George finally showed up at his office with a thick folder of documents and a flash drive full of files, Richard's heart pounded. George sat across the desk, his serious expression indicating the news wasn't entirely good. "I found Claire," George began. "She's in a private mental health clinic in the suburbs, a discreet place that mainly serves wealthy families looking to hide problem relatives. She was admitted 10 years ago with a diagnosis of a severe mental disorder, But from the records I accessed, the diagnosis was questionable. There's no history of proper treatment, just heavy medication to keep her sedated and controlled. Richard felt bile rise in his throat. They've had her drugged for 10 years. George nodded. And there's more. The clinic's payments are made from an offshore account linked to your family, specifically to your older brother, Edward Miller. He took over the operation when your father died, kept Brenda on the payroll, and made sure Claire remained institutionalized and cut off from the outside world. Richard closed his eyes, breathing deeply to keep from exploding. Edward, his older brother, the perfect heir who had always followed in their father's footsteps without question. Of course it was him. Edward had always been cold, calculating, obsessed with maintaining the family's pristine reputation. But Richard never imagined he was capable of something so cruel. I have documents signed by your father, George continued, pulling papers from the folder. Contracts where Claire relinquishes any rights to you or to Emily's paternity. There are also records of bank transfers to Brenda for the last 10 years, always on specific dates, in exchange for keeping the girls under control and away from you. And then there's this. George held out an audio recorder. It's a conversation between Edward and Brenda recorded 2 weeks ago. I got access because Brenda started getting nervous and threatened to expose everything if she didn't get more money. Edward didn't know she was recording. Richard played the audio. Edward's voice was unmistakable, arrogant and cold. Brenda, you need to keep those girls quiet. If Richard finds out anything, he'll want to play the hero, and it will destroy the family's image. You've been paid well for years, now do your part. Brenda's tense voice replied, But he's already been here, Edward. He gave the girl money at the store. He's asking questions. I didn't sign up to deal with this. Then do what you have to do, Edward cut in. If you have to, send the girls away. Put them in some group home out in the middle of nowhere. I don't care. Just handle it before it becomes a bigger problem. Richard stopped the recording, shaking with rage. He wanted to slam his fist on the desk, to scream, to confront Edward immediately. But George placed a hand on his shoulder, urging calm. Richard, if you act on impulse, you could make things worse. Edward could destroy evidence, bribe people. He might even try to have you committed, claiming emotional instability. You have to be strategic. Secure the girl's safety first, then go after him. Richard took a deep breath, forcing reason to overcome emotion. You're right, what do you suggest? First, get the girls away from Brenda immediately. Get an emergency court order alleging imminent risk. Use these recordings as proof. Second, get Claire out of that clinic. Hire a human rights lawyer. Report the forced commitment. Demand an independent medical evaluation. And third, build a solid case against Edward and anyone else involved. This isn't just about money. It's about false imprisonment, document forgery, blackmail, abuse of power. Richard nodded, already reaching for his phone. He called the best family lawyer he knew, briefly explained the situation and demanded immediate action. Then he called Marcia and gave clear instructions. I'm going to get the girls now. Prepare a room in my apartment, buy clothes, toys, everything kids need. And hire a child psychologist. They're going to need support. Marcia, who already knew part of the story, didn't ask questions. She just said she would take care of everything. Richard got in his car and drove straight to Emily's house. It was almost 8 p.m. when he arrived. The lights were on, and he could hear raised voices inside. He rang the doorbell, but no one answered. He rang again, more insistently. That's when he heard a child scream, sharp and terrified. Without a second thought, Richard forced the gate, which was only latched, and went inside. The scene in the living room made him freeze for a second. Brenda was grabbing Emily by the arm, shaking the girl and yelling. Lily was huddled in a corner, crying desperately, clutching her doll. You talked to him, didn't you? Brenda shrieked. You told him something. I warned you not to talk to anyone. Emily struggled to get free, tears streaming down her face. I didn't tell him anything. I swear. Let go, you're hurting me. Richard lunged forward, pulling Brenda away from Emily firmly but without violence. Get your hands off her, now! Brenda, startled, stepped back and took a defensive stance. Who do you think you are, barging into my house? These girls are my responsibility. No, they're not, Richard said with a cold, dangerous calm. You were being paid to keep them here. away from the people who actually matter. And that ends tonight. Brenda tried to argue, but Richard gave her no room. He pulled out his phone, showed her the documents George had found, and said in a voice that left no doubt, "I have proof of everything. The payments, the blackmail, their mother's forced institutionalization. If you try to stop me from taking these girls, I will make sure you are charged as an accomplice to all of it. The choice is yours." Brenda turned pale. She looked at the girls, then at Richard, and realized she had lost. Without a word, she grabbed her purse and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Richard knelt in front of Emily, who was trembling. "Emily, I know this is all scary and confusing, but I need you to trust me. I'll explain everything, I promise, but right now I have to get you two out of here. You're not safe." Emily looked into his eyes, searching for lies, for ulterior motives. But all she saw was sincerity, urgency, and something she couldn't yet name. But that felt a lot like love. She nodded, took Lily's hand, and followed Richard to the car. On the way to his apartment, Richard tried to explain simply, "Emily, Lily, I've found out some things about your mother. Things that were hidden from me for a very long time. And I believe she didn't abandon you. She was forced to stay away, but now I'm going to bring her back, I promise." Emily stared at him with wide eyes. "You know where my mom is?" "I do," Richard replied, his throat tightening. "And I'm going to get her tomorrow, but first I need to make sure you are safe." That night, for the first time in years, Emily and Lily slept in a comfortable bed in a clean, quiet room, without fear of yelling or threats. Marcia had arranged everything with efficiency and care, and even stayed with them for a while until they felt secure. The next day, Richard went to the clinic, accompanied by George, his lawyer, and an independent medical team. The clinic's management tried to block the visit, claiming Claire couldn't have visitors without authorization from the responsible family. Richard then presented the documents proving the forced commitment and threatened to sue the clinic for complicity. The director, realizing the gravity of the situation, granted them access. Claire was in a small room, sitting in a chair, staring out the window with empty eyes. Her hair was grey and disheveled, her face marked by time and suffering, but Richard recognized her immediately. It was her, the woman he had loved, the woman who had been stolen from him. "Claire," Richard called softly. She turned slowly, and it took a few seconds for her gaze to focus on him. When she finally recognized him, her eyes filled with tears. "Richard," she whispered, her voice hoarse from years of disuse. "Are you real, or am I dreaming again?" Richard knelt in front of her, taking her hands gently. "I'm real, Claire, and I'm here to get you out. I found out everything, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't know sooner, that I didn't look for you, that I believed the lies they told me." Claire sobbed, squeezing his hands tightly. "The girls. Where are my girls?" "They're safe," Richard said. "They're with me, and from now on, no one is ever going to separate you again." It took a few days for Claire to be officially released from the clinic, with medical evaluations confirming she didn't need to be there, that the diagnosis had been fabricated, and that years of unnecessary medication had caused damage that would require proper treatment. But Claire was lucid, she was aware, and above all, she was desperate to see her daughters. When Richard finally brought Claire home, Emily and Lily were waiting in the living room. The moment they saw their mother was indescribable. Lily, who barely remembered her, was shy at first, but when Claire opened her arms, the little girl ran and threw herself into the embrace. Emily took a little longer, needing to process it all, but when she finally got close and smelled her mother's scent, something inside her broke. She cried like she hadn't cried in years, and Claire held her so tightly it seemed she was trying to make up for all the lost time. Richard watched the moment from a distance, his heart full of an emotion he couldn't name. And then Claire looked at him, tears streaming down her face, and said, "Richard, you have to know. Emily is your daughter. I tried to tell you, but they wouldn't let me. They took me from you, they took me from her, and I spent 10 years locked in that place praying that one day you would find out the truth. Richard already knew, but hearing Claire say it out loud made it all feel more real. He looked at Emily, who was staring at him with wide eyes, trying to understand. And then he said, his voice thick with emotion, "Emily, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But I know now. And if you'll let me, I want to be the father you deserve. I want to make up for all the years they stole from me, from you." Emily didn't say anything at first. She just looked at her mother, who gave an encouraging nod, and then she took a step toward Richard, and another, until finally she held out her hand shyly, and Richard took it gently as if he were holding the most precious treasure in the world. The following days were about rebuilding. Richard filed a lawsuit against Edward and everyone involved in the conspiracy, publicly exposing their crimes. Edward tried to deny it, tried to buy off witnesses, but the evidence was irrefutable. He ended up resigning from all his positions at the company and facing criminal charges that would keep him busy for years. Claire began proper treatment to recover from the effects of the forced medication, and slowly she started to become the strong, loving woman she had always been. Emily and Lily started therapy to process everything they had been through, and gradually they learned to trust again, to dream again, to be children again. Richard transformed part of his company into a foundation to combat child abuse and neglect, established strict policies of respect and dignity in all his stores, and became a public advocate for social causes. But above all, he became a father, a present, loving father, who learned that the greatest success in life isn't measured by how much money you accumulate, but by how many lives you can touch with true love. And Emily, the girl who had walked into a store just to buy a simple gift for her sister, discovered that the greatest gift she could ever receive wasn't on any shelf. It was the chance to have a real family, to have her mother back, to have a father who loved her, and to know for certain that she would never again be treated as if she were invisible. Because sometimes the most beautiful justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from the love that refuses to give up, the truth that refuses to stay buried, and the courage of a little girl who, in fighting for a present for her sister, ended up opening the door to a new beginning that would change all of their lives forever. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Emily, Richard, and Claire has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of reunion, justice, and true love, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. Every day we bring you intense narratives like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, and reminding us that even in the most difficult situations, love and truth always find a way. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions.